Okay, everyone. So nice to see you. My name is Asha Wareham. I will be facilitating this evening. I work with the BC Agricultural Climate Action Research Network, and we're a group that supports research collaborations between producers and researchers and other groups in the province, but you'll hear a little bit more about that later. But I know some of you in the room, so nice to see you. Tonight, we're going to be launching a new research trial that's kind of an iterative process out of the Sustainable Agricultural Landscapes Lab and UBC's Center for Sustainable Food Systems. And this project is called the Regenerative-Organic Climate Resilient Vegetables Project. And it's a really neat on-farm research project that's happening across the province. So this evening is going to be the opportunity to hear from some of the research leads, ask your questions, hear a little bit about some of the results that this is building on, and just have a bit of a discussion around these practices on organic vegetable farms. And before we jump in too deep, I'd like to start off and just acknowledge where I am situated at the moment. I am on unceded ancestral and traditional Musqueam territory near a place called Islemach, otherwise known as Jericho Beach. And this place is known as kind of a life spring. The etymology of the word really is like the life spring, the mother spring for Musqueam folks. So I encourage all of you joining from wherever you're joining from across many traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories in now called British Columbia, just to reflect on the stewards, the caretakers of these lands, and the relationship that we have ongoing with these stewards through our activities of agriculture, living, working, and playing. At BC ACARN, we acknowledge the rights, interests, priorities, and concerns of all Indigenous peoples, and we're committed to actively working towards reconciliation for our words and actions. So I'll just give you a minute to just think about where exactly you're at and give a little moment of thanks to the stewards of those lands. Thank you. Okay, so BC ACARN, as I mentioned, we'll just be kind of facilitating this event. And this is one of the things that we like to support researchers around the province. We drive collaborative research partnerships for resilient agriculture in BC. And we do this by trying to bring, traditionally siloed groups together. So aligning research priorities between researchers, producers, government agencies, and industry partners. And we hope that by doing this, we're building strong research partnerships. We're connecting producers with reliable climate research, practical solutions, and elevating their voices in the research decision-making processes. ACARN's been around since around 2017, and we're just a small team of 3, but we are really grateful to the many partners who are interested in working with us and who we get to learn from regularly. So some of the things that you may know us for, we collaborate with members to identify strategic research priorities. We work with all commodities in BC agriculture, not just you lovely organic vegetable folks, although we do love you so much. And we work on establishing climate research projects in the agricultural sector. And these are pretty diverse. This could look like something like this project or a technical working group that's working towards kind of broader soil health assessments. We also are known for hosting events to share learnings on key research topics, and we like to showcase new research tools and practices. So, events like this, we also put on kind of in-house events that are larger research showcases or training offerings to do things like enhance farmer-centered science communication. And last but not least, we work towards translating research into producer-facing fact sheets, infographics, and research briefs. So the BC Food Web is one of our initiatives that's under our umbrella, and they're known for producing really beautiful fact sheets and research briefs that are connecting producers with really relevant research in a way that is easy to understand in the context of the farm. All right, so that's enough about us. I'll just touch on some housekeeping before I dive into introducing our speaker for the evening. So for recording this session, the presentation portions will be recorded and made available to you after the event, but we won't be sharing the discussion portions just to maintain your anonymity, so you're free to say what you like within reason. And for questions, I encourage you to add any questions to the Q&A box, although we will also be monitoring the chat. That's a great place to ask questions and discuss as well. This is a meeting, so if there's anyone brave enough, I encourage you to raise your hand and unmute, and we're happy to have a conversation that way too. And if you'd like to connect with BC Acorn, there's a QR code up on the screen where you can kind of join our network and receive information on what we're up to. Wonderful. All right, so into the agenda for this evening, I'm really excited to welcome Doctors Jessica Chardas and Delisa Lewis, who are both affiliated with the Center for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm and the Sustainable Agricultural Landscape Lab. Dr. Jessica Chardas is the current research manager and a postdoctoral fellow with the Sustainable Agricultural Landscapes Lab, and she is working on this Regenerative-Organic Climate Resilient Vegetables project. And Dr. Delisa Lewis has worked on many iterations of this through the Organic Science Cluster over the past probably decade now, which is really exciting to be able to see these treatments and the results that are being produced over many years. So through the flow of this evening, Jessica will start us off in introducing this new 4-year phase of the RCRV trial, talking about cover cropping, nutrient management, conservation tillage, and how those practices factor in for things like profitability on organic vegetable farms. And then Delisa will talk a little bit about some of the results that, preliminary findings around how these treatments measure up for carbon sequestration and soil health. And then we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A to hear from some of the partner growers and just have a bit of a discussion around your experiences, your goals, and some of the research priorities that you might have around some of these practices. Perfect. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, but before I pass it entirely over, I'd really appreciate if folks could fill out a quick poll just so we can get a sense of who is in the room today. It's definitely one of my favorite things at Acorn events is we get a pretty wide diversity of folks, and that makes it for some really interesting conversations. So yeah, we got lots of growers. Thanks for coming. I know this is absolutely go time, so nice to see you in the room. I know we're a little late, but I hope that your tomatoes are in and the irrigation is going and things are feeling exciting. Wonderful. All right, still some movement on these. Looks like we've got lots of folks from Vancouver Island, Gulf Islands, Lower Mainland. Hello to the folks from the Okanagan and the Kootenays. Nice to see you all. All right, perfect. All right, I'm gonna pass it over to Jessica to chat about the launch of this new trial.
I'm already unmuted. Thanks, Asha. Appreciate the context setting and the introduction here. It's nice to meet all of you. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Some of this gets into detailed data, and I'm sharing for other researchers who aren't with us here today and past projects, and just want to make sure I represent everything appropriately. But yeah, I will go ahead and dive in. As Asha mentioned, we'll be talking about this Regenerative-Organic Climate Resilient Vegetables project. That's an Organic Science Cluster project with an overarching goal of standing and improving the soil health and climate impacts of organic diversified vegetable production while building resilience and profitability. I won't go through all of these because it's quite texty, but some of the objectives of this project are to develop some tools that can help us to monitor, report, and verify these climate or soil health impacts of regenerative or climate resilient practices, to identify a set of management practices that have the greatest potential for improving climate outcomes and soil health, And then to assess also kind of taking a more holistic approach, not just thinking about the sort of biophysical impacts of these management practices, but how does this affect the social and economic context on farm? What are the barriers that currently exist to adoption, and what are some novel ways to overcome those? All of this is kind of grounded in principles of agroecology, and actually maybe I'll first show those principles of agroecology and then kind of ground us in the how we're applying that to our research approach here for RCA. But yeah, really, these are the sort of 10 elements of agroecology, really focusing on promoting diversity, resilience, maximizing efficiencies, having a circular system where you're recycling inputs, where you're creating synergies on farm, where you're co-creating and sharing knowledge, which is kind of a big part of this development of the farmer networks aspect of this project. Really elevating human and social values, culture and food traditions, which are often left out of these broader conversations. And then kind of at the larger sort of infrastructural level, thinking about circularity at an economic level and responsible governance. And so in order to implement those kind of into this project, we're trying to make sure that this is contextualized, that we're recognizing the diversity of soil types, regions, microclimates, production systems across British Columbia, that we're doing research that's relevant and targeted, that answers the questions that growers have, the challenges that growers face, not just things that sound exciting or interesting for big publications and big journals. We're really trying to take a collaborative approach that feels like things have been co-created, that we're co-learning together, using inquiry-based methods. So we're really learning by doing, by experimenting, by asking questions. We're seeking efficiencies in our management practices, embracing the complexity of agricultural systems, learning from the variability that exists, and constantly adapting our management. And so I'm gonna jump through some of these slides fairly quickly because I think some of this has been presented in the past and maybe folks have already heard about this data. This is kind of the sort of context or the preceding projects that have led to where we are today with our CRV. And actually there was even more nutrient management trials that were conducted before the data that I'm going to share with you. But just these were kind of the more impactful, more recent projects that really rolled into what we're doing now with this RCRV project. And so I'll just kind of give a high level overview of some of those and kind of what we found, and then I'll kind of get into the context of RCRV specifically. Yeah, so in 2023, there was a summer cover crop trial that was looking at different combinations of oats, peas, and fava beans, I should say. And those were conducted at 3 main sites: UBC Farm, Green Fire Farm. We have Delisa on the call with us today, and she'll share some more about her own experience at Green Fire, as well as her experiences on the daughter farms in Vancouver Island, which have been involved in this RCRV project thus far. And yeah, so what they kind of high level found, and Delisa, feel free to jump in here at all if I get anything wrong or if you want to add anything additional. But at a high level, the irrigated cover crops, as you can imagine, did significantly better than the unirrigated crops. There was, and this is just showing the biomass for the cover crop itself, not for like a subsequent crop or something of that nature. Quite a bit of variability between UBC and what was found at Green Fire and Amara, which is a farm on Vancouver Island. And actually you can see, although Amara and Green Fire had a lot of similarities, or were much more similar, I should say, than UBC Farm, there was less of a difference from irrigated versus unirrigated. So maybe that means something to do with the soil being able to be more resilient to drought conditions or dry conditions. But yeah, I think what the main takeaway here to note is that, even in a very small region, we get very different results on different mixes. But we did tend to see that the as you at UBC farm, that as you added more diversity into the mix, that you got a little bit more biomass out of it. Less meaningful differences across the treatments, if any, at Greenfire and Amara. And then from the weed perspective, again, somewhat different trends across UBC Farm and Greenfire Farm. But it did seem that weeds, especially in the irrigated, which again, you know, if you're irrigating, you're not just feeding your cover crops, you're feeding the weeds also. But fava beans did seem to show a bit more weed pressure at both sites. So interesting that you see some sort of a commonality across sites. There was also a project conducted looking at winter soil management. So really trying to evaluate soil cover strategies to determine the impacts on both soil water and soil nitrogen. Thinking about the sort of availability of resources for the following crop. Focused on the general strategies of cover cropping, silage tarps, and then, you know, sort of business as usual of winter fallow. This was conducted in 3 different regions, which maybe is an impetus for the regions that we'll be looking at for this RCRV project that we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, Vancouver Island, the Lower Fraser Valley, and the Kootenays. And in terms of nitrate, they tended to find more nitrate under the tarps. It was a agronomically significant amount, so that obviously has implications for how you're going to fertilize in the spring, and potentially even for the yield and productivity of the system in that following crop. In terms of soil water, you know, again, the thought of tarps is to kind of see if how they'll influence water dynamics, and if they could possibly create drier spring conditions, help things dry up more quickly. Didn't really show a clear trend in the spring dates. In general, the tarp ground was wetter in the spring than the non-tarp or cover cropped areas. But that wasn't consistent across sites. There was no real interaction between the overwinter cover types. And so looking to the data from UBC Farm to figure out what might be going on, we were able to take soil water measurements approximately every 2 weeks throughout the entire trial, so getting much more granular data. And this is the timeline of soil water content at UBC Farm, the months of the year along the X, and from November 2019 to October 2021. The gray shaded regions represent the time when the tarps were installed in the field. And we're measuring soil water as volumetric water content, which you can see on the y-axis. And when they installed the tarps and planted the cover crops, soil moisture was about the same, but after a few weeks, the tarp ground did start to become drier, stayed drier all the way through December, January, into March, at which time the cover crop plots started to dry out as well. And the tarp plots stayed at the relatively same moisture level until they were removed. And so, but by the time the growing season comes, there weren't any visual differences in soil water. That when fall came, they again installed tarps and saw a similar trend with the tarp plots staying drier than the cover crops until about mid-March. So we can see that the timing of tarp removal is important to soil moisture. The amount of soil water will be related to other things like soil texture and the amount of precipitation as well. So just to kind of give some grounding of these 2 projects, which I'll share some more recent projects that have looked into these cover crop mixes and tarping at the UBC farm here, and then when I'm through with that, I will jump into the details of RCRV, the sort of background, and kind of some of, as Asha mentioned, Delisa and I both will be able to share some of the findings. So following up on that summer cover crop trial in 2024, they added in a bunch of different perennial cover crop treatments. And so these are the mixes here on the right. UBC's mix was rye, oat, phacelia, and clover, and so on and so forth. Just 3 different types of mixes. And so our treatments looked at those different mixes. And the plus sign means that we looked at those mixes with or without double the rate of clover. And this was, again, conducted at those same 3 farms I mentioned before. And you saw the biomass from 2023 previously. This is just shown a little bit differently, so that I can kind of show you the contrast to 2024, because then when they repeated this in 2024, some of these trends you see where fava beans didn't perform as well on biomass, and where in peas the irrigated performed better than the non-irrigated, we see a little bit of a change in the results in 2024 for those treatments. And then this is just showing the additional treatments we added, which were all those pollinator mixes. And perennial, geez. These are the addition of the perennial mixes. And the perennials seem to do a bit better than the annual cover crops. From a nitrogen yield perspective, we saw that, again, kind of as you increase the diversity in the mix, you tended to or added in peas, which again are leguminous and are going to be fixing nitrogen. You saw more of a nitrogen yield. But again, when you compare to these perennial cover crop mixes, we see much more of a nitrogen gain. So there may be some benefit both to the perennial nature of them, but also, if you recall from the list I showed, there is slightly more diversity in these mixes. So it could also just be the diversity of species in the cover crops. And I'll skip over the carbon to nitrogen ratios and just say kind of key takeaways from that work has been that under irrigation, 2 species mixes seem to work the best, with oat peas standing out. Without irrigation, it would be advised to avoid monocrops from what we found, as both peas and fava beans tended to perform more poorly than the mixes. Adding legumes is obviously a great way to boost the nitrogen, and getting legumes in your mix is helpful if that's something you need to do. And then again, perennials seem to have lower above ground biomass, but the root systems were more developed than the annual systems, and they were a more valuable source of nitrogen. And so similarly, following up on the tarping experiment at UBC Farm, we followed up with a comparison of tarping with, instead of the mixes, looking at tarping and cover cropping, and thinking about the drying out of the soil, looking at tarping and reduced tillage and cover cropping, and looking at a broad suite of soil health indicators. So we looked at plant available nitrogen. And I should mention, I apologize, the previous project I talked about was done by Raylani Kessler. And this project is Katie Campagnelli. And yeah, maybe I should also just say these more clearly. So the treatments were intensive tillage, tarp plus reduced tillage, tarp plus no tillage, and then a cover crop. And we measured plant available nitrogen biweekly, biseasonally. We measured soil carbon and aggregate stability. And then once a season, looking at earthworm abundance. They also did a thorough yield analysis, which included both the biomass and a nutrient analysis, and then greenhouse gas analysis weekly or biweekly during the winter. This is just kind of showing the farm operations associated with those various treatments. So intensive tillage, like the business as usual approach. In the tarp plus reduced tillage, just using mowing and not plowing or disking. And in the tarp, sorry, there should be some sort of disking that happened in the reduced tillage, but not in the no tillage. And then summer cover cropping, standard tillage practice, but adding in a summer cover crop, which is distinct from all the other treatments here. Across the board, though, they're all getting compost, they're all getting drip tape, and they're all being mowed. And this is just giving a little bit more granular detail about those farm operations. So if anyone wants to take a quick moment there, this is the cultivation and the tarping. And then in terms of the cover crops, seeded on June 14th, incorporated with flail mowing, and there was split plots where either it was just pea or oats and peas. And essentially and this was, I should mention, in winter squash, and yield seemed to improve as you went from business as usual to tarping plus no tillage to tarping plus reduced tillage. However, it's not significantly different. The next kind of step is to analyze the data, looking at just tarping versus not tarping, because if you look, you can see that both the tarp and no tillage and the tarp and reduced tillage are quite a bit higher than the intensive tillage. And so it may be that we are not seeing much differences in terms of the tillage practices, but maybe the tarping is making a difference here. And then I will just share that the cumulative nitrate and ammonium that was collected, in addition to the measurements and indicators I mentioned, they also used resin strips to measure nitrate and ammonium throughout the season. And this is showing the cumulative across the season. They took samples quite frequently. I think actually I can show you here. This shows all the individual points where nitrate and ammonium were measured. And there's kind of, you can see that there's not clear trends as they move. Different treatments are having higher nitrate or ammonium at different times of the year. It does seem like we can see sort of things like a tillage spike in pan, in the potential nitrogen shortly after tillage, which is kind of what you anticipate or hope for with your tillage practices, that it'll help make nutrients more available. But when we kind of look at the cumulative over time, we do start to see some more clear trends. And the intensive, so something to bear in mind is the cover crop obviously had peas in the mix, but these measurements are happening not necessarily at a time when you're already getting that nitrogen gain from those cover crops. And so we actually see lower nitrate in the cover crop systems and ammonium, because those plants are probably taking some of that up and out of the soil and holding it in their biomass. But then as you look at these sort of tarping and tillage or tillage and tarping treatments, you do see higher nitrate and ammonium, and actually even higher under the tarps than in our business as usual intensive tillage. And kind of looking at how that pans out with yield, we do, again, not really see significant differences, but we do see a trend of higher pan as we have higher yields. And so kind of some of the key takeaways from that work between 23 and 24 is that there's, like I said, tillage is possibly causing the spikes and spike in pan early in the season. We're seeing higher ammonium and nitrate correlated with higher yields. But it's important to note that this is just a small window into these practices. There's limitations because they're being done only at a single location. And the results you're going to find from different management practices are very context specific, which is why it's really important to experiment with research at your own farm, and why it's really important from a research perspective that we do more of our research on farm. And as much as it's great to have these controlled, randomized block designs that are replicated, if we're really going to start to understand the impacts of management, we need to start looking at as much diversity of regions, production systems, soil types, and microclimates as possible. And the best way to do that is with on-farm research. And so that's really just now, I will jump in now to the overview of the RCRV project, because I think that's the main purpose of this, is to actually, instead of just doing research at UBC farm, for instance, starting to do research at a network of farms and seeing if we start to see trends that are comparable across those sites. And again, really ensuring that back to those agroecological principles, if we do this, if we do more on-farm research and building of research networks with growers, then we can start to create more of a two-way exchange where the research is really being informed by the questions that growers have, the challenges that they face, and where the results of that research is being shared back in real time so that it can be used to adapt and inform your management. And so now that we're moving into these on-farm field trials for this RCRV project, which is scoped to run from 2024 to 2028. We're thinking about some of the following questions, but we're interested in what your questions are. So some of those are, how does reduced tillage impact soil health? How does nitrogen that is fixed on site through legumes, through cover crops, impact yields and profit? What combination of regenerative practices can maximize soil carbon? How does this impact profit? And how do these results vary across these regions of Vancouver Island, the Lower Mainland, and it's actually the Kootenays, sorry, not Okanagan. And yeah, I guess just to kind of share a little bit about the design of the project, the idea is to use this sort of mother-daughter approach, or parent-child, some folks call it. But the idea is you have your sort of controlled randomized block research sites where you're doing replicated designs and can do long-term research like we have at UBC Farm and Greenfire Farm. Those are the two farms in the mother category. But also to build this network of daughter farms. And so our goal is to have 15 farms. Delisa will talk in a moment about the 5 farms that are currently situated on Vancouver Island. I'm actually out in the Kootenays right now, getting to know some farmers out here and taking some soil samples. And then we're still trying to round out our 5 farms on the Lower Mainland. So if anyone's interested or knows anyone who might be interested, we're super interested to connect and learn more about your farm and share more about the project and explore ways that we could work together. But yeah, the sort of as an example timeline, this is kind of, and I guess I'll just pause and say, Delisa, I know that you're out there on Vancouver Island, so I don't want to kind of step on your toes so much. If you'd like to kind of talk through any of this, feel free or jump in if you want to add anything. But otherwise, maybe I'll just pause there for a moment. Shall I carry on here with the sort of timeline and research design, and then just kick it to you to introduce the 5 farms?
That sounds good, Jessica. Go ahead with timeline and I'll jump in.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, there are already 5 farms that have been participating on Vancouver Island over the last year. And I'm just going to share a little bit briefly about the sort of example timeline and research design that they've used on Vancouver Island. And so there's obviously a breakdown of tasks, some things that the growers are doing, just your typical management, and then adding in a layer of potentially trialing some of these management practices. And so the 3 main sort of management practices that we're looking at a high level for our CRV are nutrient management, reduced tillage, and cover cropping. Again, we want this to really be informed by the interests in those specific regions. And so there's flexibility within that about what that looks like in terms of implementation, for instance. But that's kind of the bounds of what we were funded to do. And so over this timeline, the grower is doing their business as usual management, but also maybe incorporating some of these trials around cover cropping or nutrient management or reduced tillage. And from our perspective, what we're kind of responsible for is coming out and doing a baseline sampling, getting samples of your soil, of your compost, analyzing that data, using that to inform a nutrient management plan, and then coming out and supporting to the extent you're interested in the application of those amendments, coming in for a mid-season check, doing some field observations, taking some photos, kind of just trying to get some qualitative information about how things are going. And then at the end of the season, when you're about to harvest, we'll come do a little mini harvest in a small area where we can do an estimation of yield. And then we'll also do another sampling at post-season. So we can kind of see the nutrient levels and other sort of soil health properties at the beginning of the season and then post-harvest. And then we can start to grow our data set in a way that we can start to improve the nutrient management plan and update it based on the things that we're learning. And then again, to the extent you're interested, we can come out and support with the planting of a cover crop if that happens to be in the trial. Again, as an example of sort of the research design that was used on Vancouver Island, they looked at reduced tillage. So I should just say at a high level, it's either reduced tillage or typical tillage. And then layered on top of that is a nutrient management. So for each of these nutrient management treatments, you would have a treatment both with reduced tillage and with typical tillage. And so your basic business as usual nutrient management plan, and then a version that's includes a summer cover crop plus compost and feather meal, and then one that just uses compost and feather meal. So using that summer cover crop to get a little extra nitrogen gain. Let's see. And then, yeah, I guess I'm realizing I skipped a slide, so I'm going to be slightly discordant. The next thing will be for Delisa to share a little bit about the research farms on Vancouver, or the farms on Vancouver Island. And if you'd like, Delisa, I can kind of throw the slides up as we go. But I did skip over kind of the benefits of this project for the growers themselves. So if it's all right, I might just quickly throw that in because maybe that's the thing to start with is why should I care? Why am I here? What is the value of this for you as a grower? And I mentioned a lot of things on that timeline that I'll contextualize a little bit here into kind of the benefits. But so what we ask of you is to dedicate a small area of your field. It does not have to be a large area at all. It can be, just a row, for instance, just a part of a row. For ideally 4 years to this project. Not just dedicate your small area, dedicate yourself maybe to being a part of the network, to co-learning with other growers in your region, sharing the management information you're using, and insights on the individual adoption of management practices on your farm. So we have an understanding of kind of where you're starting and what you might be interested in doing. Implementing the trial, as we mentioned, and preferably using a single crop across all treatments, because the crop can lead to so much variability in the results that it might sort of mask any sort of treatment effects. And then coordinating with other regional trial farms, and kind of trying to see if we can, over the 4 years, maybe get on the same page of what that crop is that we're looking at, or what those treatments look like, or those trials. From what we can offer you, we can do soil, we'll do soil sampling, like I said, both pre-season and post-harvest, and do a complete suite of soil health analyses. So things like water retention, soil carbon, bulk density, nitrate and ammonia, respiration, available carbon, available nitrogen, let's see, aggregate stability, and then also be able to do a cover crop and amendment nutrient analysis, so we can really start to get as much of the variables as we need to do an effective nutrient management plan. We can provide summer and winter cover crop seed, but not just cover crop seed, really any of the amendments you might need to implement the trials. We can either buy them directly or reimburse you for. As I mentioned, just before you harvest, we'll come out and do a little subsample to get at the yields. We'll both do the biomass as well as a nutrient analysis of the crop. We will also pay you for the crop that we harvest for that yield. And we will provide nutrient management plans. We can do that all 4 years, as well as if there's interest, training on how to use some of the nutrient management tools that we use. And then, yeah, just this opportunity to co-learn together. And so, yeah, sorry for that bit of back and forth. If you don't mind, Delisa, I'll just walk through each of the 5 farms that are currently operating on Vancouver Island. And then I can share a little bit of the bit of data that has been already analyzed and processed. And more importantly, I think, Delisa, if you don't mind, sharing about your experiences on these farms and the sort of and at Greenfire as well.
That sounds good. Thank you so much, Jessica. And I would say that that slide of benefits and basically what we can provide and what the farmers provide is a great intro to this moment. But I also want to connect with a couple of our Vancouver Island farmers who are on this call, on this webinar tonight, and just say from the bottom of our hearts as researchers and as growers, we are so thankful to the returning growers who've cooperated. And in this case, we have Arzina Hamir of Amara Farm, who's been cooperating with our research and our research team since the very beginning of the organic science clusters, as well as John Razinski and Aaron Bett, Fierce Love Farms. We learn so much together. It is a great example of this co-learning. And so at Fierce Love Farm, you've got the slide right there. Thanks, Jessica. That is on Qualicum Beach. And, it would be wonderful. It might be also a good time upcoming to sort of open up the floor for both questions and input from the growers. It's really not about my experience with the research. It's much more about their experience participating and helping us. We're informing the research together, because I'd say the main finding for me so far in 2025, as well as other years, is we're looking at a suite of beneficial management practices, and our theory, one of the main hypotheses, is that these practices are better together. And what we have is a very complex, I would just use the word choreography. These growers, from John and Aaron to Arzina to all of those who have been cooperating with us, they're innovating ahead of the research, coming up with complex systems designs around the reduced tillage, the use of tarps, and cover cropping. So it's a really complex dance that we're involved with. So I'll just pause a moment and ask whether, in this case, we have Fierce Love on the screen. We have Aaron and John. You want to unmute and say hi to folks? And if anyone has questions for our already participating farmers, this might also be a nice moment for that. Aaron, John, you there?
Hey,
Hey.
hey.
I'll stop sharing for a moment so that maybe we can see folks' faces while they talk.
Perfect. Hey.
Thanks for
Hi.
joining us, folks.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for hosting this. Yeah, so please go on.
Well, I just wanted to give a chance for people to see your face. If you have any thoughts about, either you're a glutton for punishment or there's something going on that's working all right with this research cooperation. John, do you have any thoughts about that? What has it brought to Fierce Love Farm so far? And because I can certainly attest to what you all bring to us, but let's start with you.
Yeah, we kind of jumped in with the soil analysis lab a few years ago at the Halliburton site. So that's the Halliburton site, y'all, is in Victoria, where we started our farm. We relocated to Qualicum Beach in 2022. So some of the practices and principles we kind of took with us from working with the soil analysis lab, which included incorporating cover crops into our beds, and also using tarps and kind of just like Jessica was talking about, like doing our own research with the research that is also happening with UBC as well. We're trying to kind of see like what our water retention was like, but here at our Qualicum site, it's more about we've kind of shifted into looking at this research project with UBC in terms of building soil and soil organic matter, because it was very, 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 very low when we got here. And so the research beds, yeah, we have the one bed that's closest to the alley in that photo is a no-till bed, and the one that's one bed in is a low tillage bed. And so yeah, we're going into our second year of production in those beds, and this beets are going to be basically our first kind of like cash crop this year. Potatoes, we had our yield had increased a little bit compared to some of the other beds that we had going on, specifically in the low tillage bed. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of see what the results will be with like a crop like beets that grows on the surface versus underneath the soil. So yeah.
Thank you so much, John. And I mean, again, I would say that the innovation, the other beneficial management practice that is involved here is really the complex rotation that aligns all of the the timing, but the sequence of crops. So Jessica mentioned one aspect of the trial that we'd really like to continue. It simplifies the research, and that is finding single harvest crops. So John gave the example of the beet, and it helps us more readily quantify the yield results. What I'm seeing and hearing on other farms across Vancouver Island are really carefully selected crops, but also the sequencing of crop, tarp, cover crop. It's part of this because we're all learning, and I believe Jessica touched on this as well, the importance of timing and tillage, and the nutrient availability can't be overemphasized. There's site-specific, soil-specific, region-specific aspects to this. And of course, all of us know that there are season-specific, ooh, that one's difficult, the variability of the precipitation regimes that we're in. Last year was La Nina. We rolled out of 2 years of drought. So the great gift of this long-term research is that we begin to see not just the strategies, but the adaptations around these soil moisture and tillage pressures and dilemmas. John, again, thank you so much. And I would just say shout out to any of you all who are interested or thinking about joining us, whether the Lower Mainland or elsewhere. We've got growers on the line. Growers on the line who can speak to their experience, and that's going to be the best way to learn about it from my perspective. Jessica, if you want to keep going through the introduction of the Vancouver Island folks, we still have Arzina, again, Amara Farm up North Island, who's been incredibly supportive and steady with us through the research for many, many years. This is Whitaker Farm, another North Island farm, or we call it North Island, where I am in the Cowichan Valley. They are doing this year. I just sampled their cover crop compost and soils, and similarly, they innovate around their reduced tillage using broad fork. It's a technique familiar to many. But they're also using the sequencing of cover crops and tarps and select rotations through the long-term research. So it's really fascinating. Well, let's touch on Amara Farm now, and Arzina. I know you're not shy. I would invite you also just to speak to this or the cover crop, any part of it you feel comfortable. If you want to unmute and say hello to folks, that would be really great.
Sure. Thanks. Good thing I'm not in my pajamas, man.
That's good. Thank you.
Well, thanks first of all to UBC and all the work you've done on this. We were early adopters of tarping. Not so much, primarily for weed control, right? Not as much for tillage but just so that over the winter, we could reduce the amount of weeds on our soil. And by the comment in the chat, if folks can see, we have quite a heavy soil here. It's unusual for Vancouver Island. We have a loam, it's 40% silt, and it really holds moisture well. So, when you were showing the differences in irrigated and non-irrigated, I was not surprised because, our soil it holds moisture almost a bit too well. But, for us, like some of the information we've already really been able to make use of, like early on when we were looking at soil moisture, we noted that, for most vegetable growers, you're trying to get onto your fields as early as possible. And if the tarps were not removed by a certain, point, like the soil moisture stayed so high, and it really delayed being able to seed. So that was one piece of information that we were able to really glean and use well. So not keeping our tarps on for too long, especially and understanding that the soil moisture under them was going to take some time before we could get onto those fields. For us, in the past, wireworm has also been an issue of why we've hesitated a bit to go to cover cropping. So the fields that we've been working with had been in hay for over 20 years, and we had extremely high wireworm numbers. Now, over the years, we've been farming them for now a dozen years. Wireworm numbers are down enough that you could see in that previous photo that we actually can plant potatoes. We still get some damage, but not too much. And so I was hesitant in the past to include any kind of cereal in our cover crop, which meant that most of our cover crops would winter kill. We'd be doing field peas, we do summer buckwheat. And really the only cover crop that even fava beans will winter kill here. So cereals would be the only one that would survive. And so I'm feeling a little bit more confident that we can introduce some cereals without really impacting our wireworm numbers. So yeah, that'll be interesting just to see.
Thank you so much, Arzina. And again, speaking of farmers innovating ahead of the research, Arzina's been really instrumental in helping, integrate the lessons learned from that summer cover crop trial into one of the better management practices, these soil health practices that we're trying to bring into play in each one of the regions for this RCRV project, and that is a summer cover crop set aside. So for those of you who we looked at, in that 2023 trial, we were looking at, in some ways, the impact of diversity in the mix, in other ways, the differences, if any, with irrigated and non-irrigated cover crops. But you also know, if you're out there making your own efforts to try and select for specific outcomes with the cover crop, whether that is weed suppression, that would be a nice one for a summer cover crop, or biomass production, or growing your own nutrients. On Vancouver Island in particular, and in other remote regions, what we really need to do with cover crops is begin to grow some of our own nutrients, also just in advance it as a form of resilience to supply chain interruptions and others. So one of the key, bits of, I don't know what it is, basically leadership from Arzina really pointed to the importance of us sourcing those cover crop seeds where we grow our, basically within the region. So for the Vancouver Island summer cover crop set-asides, we're just getting those seeds from the local feed and seed, Black Creek feed and seed. So we're really excited to, fava beans are great, but we also want to try and balance within the research really practical approaches, affordable seeds, accessible seeds. So that part is as important, so that you all can carry on and do your own demonstrations and trials and, make this work for you. Any other thoughts, Arzina, you want to share?
Well, I'm also really, again, inspired by other farmers who've used like summer planted mixes to increase the biodiversity of predatory insects, especially. And on the South Island, I've been speaking to some of the growers there who found by introducing certain species, like they saw a huge decrease in the amount of aphids in their vegetables. And like, so I'm so curious. I would really love to see if there are impacts that we see from, certain species of summer crops. So yeah, the more we can introduce, the better.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Arzina. That's great. Well, I'm excited to get back up there and get those in the ground with you soon. Thanks.
I just
All
want to
right.
jump in for a minute and say that Arzina, that comment echoed a question we got in the chat around some of the co-benefits that specific cover crop species can offer, particularly around weed suppression, beneficial insects and predatory insects. So it sounds like this is, we know this is a question for lots of growers of all commodities, and particularly for veggie folks. You have specific goals, and yeah, I think the research we're really interested in hearing those specific questions. What species are you wanting to suppress? What species are you wanting to see? So yeah, I hope we can get some info around that together.
Me too. I mean, one of our other crops that we grow is blueberries, and we know that aphids do carry fire blight between blueberries, and so this is like my co-benefit that I'm hoping that we can try and find a bit of control for. So
Awesome, thanks. Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, just going to say that, in addition to our incredibly talented, experienced growers already part of this trial, we also, Jessica was talking about the co-learning on the team. Jessica and I are soil scientists, and yet we also have entomologists. We have people who will be and are looking at the pest aspects. What do we have out there? Looking at biodiversity above and below ground in the soil as well. So that is going to be part of the project as it rolls out across the next couple of years. But Jessica, I feel like I've just thrown out Pandora's box where we don't even have slides on the screen anymore.
That was
That's when it
perfect.
gets good.
No one wants any more slides. We feel like it's our responsibility to share the data and the results, but really we just want to have a conversation. So so much to Lisa for that. That was just, yeah, beautiful just to hear about everything that's happening there through your eyes, through the growers' eyes. And yeah, really, really grateful for everyone who shared some thoughts. So yeah, Asha, I'll kick it over to you.
Awesome. Okay, so we are at 8:22. I want to let everyone go, but I want to say thank you so much for joining us. I will put up one final slide on the screen really quick, just to close us out. But thank you so much to Delisa and to Jessica for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom of all of the work over the past many years. And big thank you to John, Arzina, and the other growers who were on the call and shared a bit about their experience with us. I do hope that some growers in the room who are maybe hearing about this for the first time may be interested in learning a bit more about what it might mean to participate in this iteration of the trial. So as mentioned in the survey that will pop up when we close, there's a question that asks if you'd like to be contacted in that vein. Otherwise, feel free to send an email to ubcfarm.research@ubcfarm.ca. And on my end, ACARN, we support these kinds of events. We'll certainly be supporting kind of the public outreach part of this project. So if you'd like to hear more about the results as they come, just send us an email, info@bcacarn.ca, check out our website, bcacarn.ca, get connected to our newsletter and all of that good stuff. So thanks so much everyone for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and for the growers in the room, that you are off to a really good race this year. Thanks everyone.